Hi, everyone, and welcome to Come Undone. I'm your host, Georgia Rose, a clinical sexologist and a sex coach who helps people with their sex lives. But in this podcast, I'm the one in the hot seat. Over 8 weeks, I'll be going on my own sexual healing crash course to help me get my mojo back after cancer and grief left me feeling like a stranger in my own skin. Each week, I'll have my own sex coaching session with a leading expert, and then I'll take on an assignment. And you'll be right there with me. If you've ever felt disconnected from your body, your desire, or your sexual spark, you're not alone. So welcome. This is my sensual comeback tour, and I'm handing you a backstage pass. Hi everyone, welcome to the season finale of Come Undone. This whole series we've been asking, how do you rebuild your relationship with your sexuality after cancer and grief and a total disconnection from your body? That's what I've been asking every single week and asking all the different practitioners. And I feel like I've been gathering different pieces of the puzzle. And this episode, we're going to be putting all those pieces of the puzzle together and looking at the whole picture. And who better to do that with than Charlene Douglas? Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, no, my pleasure.
Do you want to tell everyone who you are, where they can find your work, more about your work?
Absolutely. So my name's Charlene Douglas. I'm a psychosexual therapist and a psychodynamic counsellor. I feel like I don't say that often enough. So we can kind of explore what that's about. And you can find me on charlenedouglas.com. That's my website, or Charlene Douglas Official on good old Instagram.
Good. And people might recognise you from the telly.
They might recognise me from TV as well.
Like, oh, I think I recognise her.
Yes. So on a few shows, so Married at First Sight UK, John and Lucy's Odd Couples a few years ago. Not everyone remembers that. The Sex Clinic on E4. And you just might see my face dotted around various TV shows.
Perfect. Yeah. Amazing. So this series, is basically been this sort of live sex coaching and sex therapy process. And I thought maybe today we could do almost like a therapy debrief about the journey. And we could maybe relate that to some of your clinical work and maybe some patterns that you have seen as well, with your own clients. Sure. And I also wanted to unpack a assignment that I've done in a previous session, which I've actually haven't brought to anyone yet. And I thought actually it might be quite a good time to do that. It was a pleasure journal that I had to keep, which I found quite challenging, more challenging than I would have hoped.
Sounds great. Yeah, let's do it.
So should I tell you a little bit about how I was feeling before?
That would be great, yes.
And then how I'm feeling now? So I think when I started this whole process, this whole journey, I was just feeling, the best way I could describe it was if I had a sexual spark, that's just muted and it feels really numb and it feels really flat. And it wasn't really a libido thing or a sexy thing, a bit of a sexy thing, but it wasn't a libido thing because I felt motivated to have sex. But it was almost the person that I used to be who turned up for sex just wasn't there anymore. Yeah. And I kept on really wanting to go back to her. And that person was very sensual. She was very embodied. She was very open, very lighthearted about sex. And she just wasn't there. And another massive thing was I just felt very disconnected from my body. I found it really hard to be present with myself. Yeah. Couldn't sit in a bath naked on my own. That was just impossible. Couldn't meditate. All these things that I used to find incredibly sensual activities I could do. And were very much part of my sexual toolkit. And then all that kind of, I don't know, it kind of did something to my confidence as well, I think, because I was well, I can't rely on this anymore. Sure. I don't know who I am. Yeah. So that was kind of where I was when I started. And I think now, kind of at the end of the series, I feel like I haven't reached this magic destination of everything's better, everything's fixed. But I have so much more clarity as to what the hell was going on. Yes. And understanding that, especially my body and just my emotions were actually doing appropriate things according to what I'd gone through. And I feel a lot lighter and I feel like I can surrender more, which I think is a massive one. And I feel like I realized this whole journey wasn't about going back. Right. It was about moving forward and letting go of the person I used to be. So that's the sort of arc I've gone on. Like, that's the journey.
Well, I feel like it feels like quite a journey you've been on, and that you've really been able to sort of explore parts of who you are, what sex looks like now. It feels like you're more, I suppose, closer to that place of acceptance.
Yeah, massively.
Than where you were before.
Yeah.
But I also can see that there's maybe some anxiety around, maybe what the next part of your sexual journey looks like.
Yeah, probably. I was going to ask you like about next steps, really, like what your advice would be to, and also just understanding maybe what you've seen in clinic with people who've had cancer and who've gone through, you might have seen like quite similar themes prop up with within your own work, and what that trajectory sort of looks like. I don't know if you have anything to share.
No, but it's a really interesting question, because I think the first thing that I think of is the fact that as humans, it's really important for us to kind of know what the next step looks like, to know what the step after that looks like, and then what next. And it's a really tricky place for, I think, a lot of us to be in when it's that place of uncertainty. So I'm just interested in, I suppose, your question around kind of the journey that you're still on to find answers, and to not want to feel like you're the only one experiencing something in one particular way. That, like, it's important for us to know that other people have gone through what we're going through, so we don't feel so alone in it. So
like
I
a
think
collective,
I think the therapist in me was quite just interested in the question. But I think that, so a lot of the clients that I work with, I have to say the journey is very different for them all, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that they all have in common is the fact that you need to just do things at your pace, and no story is the same. So if, for example, right now you're at a place where, let's say you're able to look at yourself in the mirror naked and feel okay with that now, maybe it's about kind of seeing what else your body can do, because it is about being in that place of curiosity, isn't it? And I think that for so many of us, we kind of fast track the curiosity part. We just want to know. Right?
Yeah.
Because we're in that world where it's like we just want to know this right now. But
Like,
I think,
tell me what to do. What's roadmap?
Yeah, and Charlene, what have other clients said? What's worked for them next? But I think it's about kind of really enjoying the journey and allowing your body to tell you what it needs next, because essentially it's about pleasure, but it's also about safety. That's first and foremost, right?
Yeah.
And our bodies are always looking for ways to feel safe.
Yeah, I think that's a massive theme that has come out of this, which was related to trauma, which surprised me, I think. I don't know why it surprised me, because I know that the journey of sex coaching and sex therapy is a holistic one. It's not practical sex steps. No. And I know that. And it's weird because I feel like I just wasn't able to sort of like apply like all my knowledge about sexual well-being and sexual wellness to myself. Like, I really kind of needed practitioners to hold up the mirror.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably true. Obviously lots of therapists are in therapy, etc.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. And I think that's a prerequisite for lots of therapists.
Absolutely. And also, the tools and the techniques around like how to increase pleasure and desire, when it comes to sex, when it comes to your relationship, whatever it may be, like those are useful, they are helpful. But if safety isn't created in the first instance, then you kind of can't go there. So a lot of my couples that I work with, when there are issues around sexual desire, the first thing that they want is like some practical tools and techniques. And if I'm honest, particularly men, when I speak to them, the first thing that they're sort of wanting is, can you give me some tools on how to get from A to B? They're not quite open to, can we just sit with what we're feeling right now, and can we think about where we want to go moving forward, but also kind of what's going on in our body right now, like what feels good, what doesn't feel so good, like what are the ingredients that are needed to continue to feel as good as we're feeling. Like, they don't really want to explore that. But it's really only when you explore that and create that safety that you can kind of really play around in that boundary of safety.
And what do you mean by safety when you say safety? Because I think sometimes it can be a bit of a broad term, and some people don't really know what that means.
Yeah. So, for example, if you have gone through trauma and something is triggering, then, noticing maybe that certain touch doesn't work for me, and then thinking about, okay, well, what do I need in this moment to feel safe? What do I need in this moment to not feel this? And, maybe you just need to go for a walk, or maybe you just need to speak to friends, or maybe you just need to, I don't know, like, have some chocolate or something for now. But it's about kind of thinking about what your body needs right now in this given moment. Like that's how you create safety for yourself. Yeah.
So that's like giving the body the mic, which is what like one of the practitioners said here.
Yeah, because I think for so many of us, we, our brains do the work, right?
Yeah.
We try to kind of like intellectualize things. We say that, this is how sex has worked for so long. So the expectation is that it will continue working that way because we know the tools. We know how to bring ourselves to orgasm. We know how to turn ourselves on. But our bodies change and it might need something different in the same way our digestion changes. When we're younger, we can eat chocolates. And when I was younger, I used to have a chocolate, packet of crisps and a canned drink. And that
like after school, I used to do the same. Now, could you imagine?
Right. In front of the TV, that used to be like the best thing ever. And sitting really close in front of the TV as well, right? And that used to be the dream. Now my body needs something different. If I were to have chocolate, a packet of crisps, a drink, and sit really close to the TV, it would be very different right now for me. And I'd feel it, I'd feel sluggish. It wouldn't be pleasure anymore. And so we have to kind of work with what our body is saying. But I think for so many of us, we don't listen. We don't listen to our bodies. We don't even give ourselves a chance to think about or experience what our body might need, because it's all up here for us.
And I think that was really exacerbated for me because of the experience of cancer and I think grief as well. Because kind of what I've learned on this journey, I don't like the word journey, but I guess it has been a journey, is that trauma completely overwhelmed my system and shut me down. And as a protective mechanism, I just sort of disassociated myself from my body. And I think I taught myself like, whoa, okay, feeling is really overwhelming right now. And so like, let's just separate from all those feelings and kind of keep in your head and just push it all down. And that's how you need to function. And I think I thought that I was functioning really well, going on my way and getting up and not being like unraveled by this situation. But one of the biggest themes of this whole journey has been you've got to feel your feels. And for me to hack through this sort of, I think I was in a freeze trauma state and I had become kind of chronically stuck there. I had to kind of hack away at that numbness and I had to feel. And that's sort of what brought me back.
How did you go through the feeling process?
One of the things I went to a rage room and I just was given like a crowbar and a mallet and I just started smashing things up. But within a few minutes I was sobbing, but like hysterically. And that just all came from kind of out. And another thing I did was I went to Amsterdam and I did a body de-armoring session with a somatic therapist.
Oh, okay.
Which was like a kind of 4-hour exorcism. And I just like screamed and cried and shouted and it was pretty kind of eye-opening. But I think I've learned about myself is that for whatever reason, maybe those very raw feelings are sometimes a bit hard to access and I have to kind of consciously release them. Since doing this podcast and doing these like sessions, I'm like, right, that was a really stressful day and I know there's some stuff in there. I'm going to go and scream into a pillow. The practitioners, like the more somatic practitioners, have really encouraged that.
Well, I think the average person, we learn quite intelligently to have these like defense mechanisms that kind of keep us quite safe. Or at least we think that they keep us safe. They do in the short term, or at least it feels like that. But I think what you're saying there is that what you needed was to kind of get those emotions out. For so many of us, like working really hard, kind of like I said, intellectualizing a situation. For some people, even humor, wherever it may be, just so that you don't have to sort of feel the feel. It sounds like you've really done the work to really let it out. And, I know you don't like the word journey, so I'm thinking of a different word.
I know, it's hard, is it like process?
A process. Process sounds so clinical, doesn't it?
I know, but it is a journey. It's a journey.
I think for you, it sounds like, you now have some really good techniques, I suppose, to to get those feelings out
in a
you know
healthy
yeah and
context.
yeah, but I think that there is something very powerful about allowing our anger and tears to come out. There's healing in that, and I think you've
Yeah.
been able to demonstrate that.
And it also made me think about how sex is obviously biopsychosocial,
Hmm.
and which means for people who are listening, sex is affected by like our bodies,
Hmm.
is affected by our emotions, our mindset, as well as our relationships and kind of society around us.
Mm.
And therefore, if I was shoving down all my emotions and sort of numbing myself to my emotions,
Mm.
then it makes sense. I'm actually doing the same to my sexual feelings as well.
Sure.
Like the two are mirrored, the two are combined. And I
Absolutely.
think
Yes.
that really made me make sense of that numb feeling, that muted feeling, because that was the only way I could describe it. I was like, I feel muted. I feel
Mm.
like it's just like the spark is like dimmed. And I think
Yeah.
just feeling that sort of aliveness again in my emotions has helped me reignite some of that sexual aliveness again. It's been
Mm.
really kind of interesting to see that.
Mm. It's interesting, I think, how people, we sometimes separate the two, don't we? So we
Mm,
kind of think that this is our sex life and, and then this is everything else that goes
mm.
on. But I think from what you just said there as well, it becomes even clearer that they are all interlinked.
Interlinked,
And,
yeah.
I think when I speak to couples and they say, Charlene, help me with my sex issue, but they say that our relationship is fine, like work is fine, I'm doing great, he's doing great, she's doing great, but it's just the actual sex life. I'm like,
Is
well,
it?
let's see. Well, let's look into this. Let's
Yeah.
explore every part of your world,
Yeah.
and see what comes up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why,
Mm.
like, yeah, sex is holistic. This whole process journey
Yeah.
is, it's been about grief. It's been
Mm.
about disassociation and trying to heal that. And
Mm.
also looking at like protective mechanisms that I had sort of unconsciously put in place, and
Mm.
like hypervigilance,
Yeah.
which I was not even aware of until I did some conscious kink work with
Mm.
Giap, who I met at
Mhm.
one of your
Yes.
workshops. um, and doing a conscious kink
Yeah.
session with her,
Mhm.
particularly with the rope, being bound by the rope,
Mm.
made me realize quite how difficult I was finding it to surrender, and how, like, yeah, those protective walls
Mm.
had sort of come up.
Can I just ask you a
Mm.
question? So prior to the cancer diagnosis, did you know as much as you know now about the world of sex?
Yes, but I feel
Yeah.
like now it's been more experiential in a way.
And the reason I was asking that question, because it sort of sounds like it's really taken you on an interesting journey of sort of understanding what your body needs at any given moment,
Mm,
and to play around, to explore, to be a bit curious. It
mm.
feels like it's sort of taking you on lots of those journeys.
Journeys. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's definitely diversified it.
And I often hear, for example, couples saying that, when I first met my partner, we had sex in this way, and I really want to kind of get back to that.
Mm,
But, I suppose the question that I would then ask is, but what if there's like a different experience that I could say
available.
to you that, that you could have,
Mm,
right now that may also be exciting and pleasurable and fun.
yeah.
And I think often when I say that, people then realize actually there's more out there. I always sort of liken it to like a kind of, I know, Roses tin or Quality Streets kind of tin of lots of chocolates, lots of
Mm,
different colors, lots of shiny, like lots of different flavors. And when you first get together with somebody, you can maybe like choose some of the chocolates, and you can have the best time ever. Like you get all the caramels and the nuts and all the lovely pieces. But then, maybe your life might take you in a direction where actually maybe some of the other chocolates you might want to try that, because that's probably best suited to you now. But it opens up a whole new appetite and
yeah.
lots of fun as well. So we are all on a journey. I feel like I can't get away from that
I
word
know,
now.
like, it is
We
the
are on a
buzzword of
journey.
the series.
we are
So-
we are on a journey.
We're on a journey.
And I do think that as we all get older, our bodies do different things. Menopause, perimenopause, different health conditions,
Yeah,
age, just in general.
yeah.
And I think if we want sex to be a part of our world, we do have to be open to the fact that our bodies might need different things
At
at different
different
periods of
times.
our lives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've sort of learned that it's about allowing yourself to evolve and being okay with that.
And I think, again, I suppose because I'm very much into that world of just being kind to ourselves, what I will say is that, that, as we know, that sexual script is very, very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, society tells us that sex should look a particular way. So when I work with clients that have, I don't know, no anus because, they've had some like bowel cancer or something like that, or they need a stoma, for example, they're very much like, oh my gosh, like that means I can't enjoy sex anymore. Now, no, you can. Sex is going to look different, but you can enjoy
Yeah.
sex again. And yeah, I think it's hard for us to kind of access that information because society's voice is very loud.
Yes, and it's
Very, very
hard.
loud.
Yeah, and we carry those expectations with us. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even as a sex therapist myself, I also have to challenge myself around like, what is right, what is wrong, even and getting rid of the right and wrong sometimes and just doing what works for my own body. I think for a lot of people, it's not so easy to do that. Society's voices, like I said, it's very loud.
It's really loud. And I think I also realized that one of those scripts that I was carrying was around being a professional and working in this space, which was like, you should be getting this right.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be messing up. Like, there was quite a lot of pressure and I think like a bit of shame that I wasn't really, I felt so stuck, and kind of giving myself permission to go small, get it wrong.
Yeah.
You can take like a tiny step forward and just give yourself permission to just go at your own pace. So I think that was a big script that was very dominant.
Yes. I think that's what people really struggle with, to kind of go at their own pace, particularly in partnered sex, where you also have to take into consideration your partner's needs and desires, But, I think if you've got a really healthy relationship with a partner, then you can have that conversation and keep that dialogue open, and you can make sure that, mutually, you're happy.
Exactly. And I
content.
think you can widen your interpretation of what like sex and intimacy is, and like rely on like sexual currency, which is kind of a term I picked up, I think, from Karen Gurney.
From Karen, yeah.
Yeah, great word, which is, for people who are listening, is, the scale of eroticism can maybe go from 0 to 100. If we think of like penetrative sex as being at 100, let's say, for example, for this conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas could you have some frequent low pressure, erotic relating around 0 to 30, like kind of more regularly, and feel that kind of the presence of your eroticism within your relationship in this kind of more slightly trivial way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing for couples to know.
It is. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you hear, for example, Karen talk about things like this, you just think, oh, actually, that's common sense, really. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, like sometimes it's like, when I say to someone, like, what turns you on? They're like, oh, yeah, like, what turns me on?
Yeah.
And then you think, but you've been having sex for like 20, 30 years maybe. And that's a difficult question for you to answer. And, I think, and there's lots of questions like that, isn't there, that, that we have to ask ourselves. I think being in this industry, we probably ask ourselves these questions all the time. It may not be like new to us. But I think for, your average person, these aren't questions that they're familiar with hearing. So things like sexual currency, you think, well, yeah, like, surely there's other things that I can do. I can think about other things that turn me on, that do it for me, that create pleasure, that create a bit of, erotic energy.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't
do
ask
it.
ourselves these things. And we don't ask ourselves these things, do we? We just think about foreplay, whatever that looks like for people, and then penetrative sex.
Exactly. And I think like the power of like a mutual bath, a mutual shower, a flirty text, like a random snog, like they go a really long way.
Yeah, a wink, even like, I mean, there are so many things out there that we can do to create some sexual
like spark
energy. And, just even within ourselves, never mind with a partner as well. But like I said, that script is so powerful that we only do what we know, or what we see on TV.
Exactly. Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah.
Should I tell you about the assignment
that
I found hard?
Do. Yes.
So I had a session a couple of episodes ago with Kate Moyle.
Yeah.
And so her assignment to me was to go and keep a pleasure journal, which was a mindfulness exercise. So to notice pleasure in my day-to-day, she wanted me to notice like 3 to 5 things outside the bedroom, and just notice them, savor them, like kind of tiny sensory moments.
Yeah.
And I was like, easy, can't wait. I used to do this all the time. Tell my clients to do that all the time.
Yeah.
It'll be easy.
Yeah.
No. And it was like effort to do it. And it felt a bit like a chore.
We won't tell Kate.
Sorry, Kate. But when I did it, it didn't. But I was a bit like, oh, gotta think about some pleasure now. And challenging is the best way to describe it. It didn't feel like easy, or it didn't feel instinctive or natural. And it made me a bit sad because I used to find these things very easy and natural. And I used to do pleasure journals all the time and kind of really enjoy them, and would definitely identify as someone who was very sensual.
Yeah.
So I was a bit like, oh gosh, wow. And so, yeah, I'm definitely out of practice. But I was wondering if you had any like thoughts around it, you know, whether these sort of exercises are a bit more difficult after you've gone through something, you know, quite traumatic, or is it more of like a practice thing, or yeah, I have a few thoughts, but I wanted to see what your thoughts were first.
I mean, I've got lots of thoughts, but I'm also conscious of the fact that, you know, I don't know, you know, your full story. So I suppose the therapist in me is so curious about so many things in terms of childhood, upbringing, sex education, your sexual journey, etc. So in terms of the advice or the suggestions I give, it's not known all of that as well,
yeah, of course.
Right? But I think the first thing that comes to mind is that, you know, when you go through any illness, cancer, or anything where your body is really challenged, I think you go from like pleasure mode to survival. You know, it's kind of, I've got to get myself through this. You know, it's a fight flight that kicks in. Your body needs, it's grappling for safety. So I do think that it's possible that it can take some time to get to a place where you can prioritize pleasure. And also, sometimes when we feel like our body hasn't been as good to us as we would want it to have been, it could be hard to think it deserves pleasure on a real subconscious level.
Fascinating. I'm fascinated by that. Tell me more.
So for example, and I think cognitively we can tell ourselves, okay, our body has done its best. It's worked really hard. It's got us through cancer. I'm still on the journey, but it's got me through cancer. But on a very subconscious level, sometimes we could still have anger towards our body. We could still not feel like it deserves to be pleasured necessarily because we've had this cancer. It's made our hair fall out. It's made us really poorly. It's made us really ill. It means that now we're having to have conversations with people about something and maybe they might feel sorry for me. So there's all these things that kind of are in the space. And so maybe it's connected to that. But as I said, because I don't know
I think that's
your story,
really,
I don't know if
really
it
interesting.
is actually true. Yeah.
I can feel like, you know, when like something like really hits you a bit, resonates. I'm like, yeah, that does resonate. And I hadn't really thought about that before. You guys, therapists are good. Because I used to think like bodies were magic and bodies were like amazing and like being attuned to your body was like the best thing ever. And actually just before I got diagnosed, I was living in Ibiza and I was like deep in somatic study around the mind-body connection. And would I say now that like I think my body's magic?
Yeah.
I haven't actually talked about this yet on this podcast. I used to be really, really into like yonis, and like, which is the tantric word for vagina, and it means like a magic portal of like the world, because in a woman's body it is the portal that like brings life into it. And I loved learning about these sort of spiritual interpretations of like women's genitals, and I was like, gosh, how sad that we've lost that. And so, a lot of my work was around that. And during treatment, they put me into medical menopause. And so, it's just through like a quite hardcore injection, which I got, I think, every second treatment. And then like, it just completely closed down my womb. I had all the kind of menopause side effects on top of the chemo side effects. But, oh, God, those night sweats or just sweats at any time. Yeah. Really hard. Yeah. And so... thinking about it now, that spiritual relationship I almost had with like my yoni fell away a little bit because it came like maybe a bit scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's no doubt that your body has been through it, and you speak about like menopause and things like that, that we've got, the pleasures of that to come, and also the unknown around that, right? Because we also know with the menopause, there are some people that don't really have hardly any symptoms at all.
Bitches.
I know, right? I've got a couple of friends that there's just no
Bugger for
symptoms
them.
at all.
Good for
Yeah,
them.
no symptoms. And then others that have got getting the like hot flashes and struggling with sleep and anxiety and things like that. So, it's really interesting. So I had iron deficiency last year, and usually when you talk about things like iron deficiency, like people are like, oh, you feeling a little bit sleepy? Was that you feel a bit tired? No, it really
It can rock you,
on a
can't
different
you?
level.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've become like an iron specialist right now. So there's like this thing called ferritin level, which is your stored iron levels, and like if it's, I think the doctors say it needs to be like a 30 or above. I don't even know what the unit is, but 30 or above. Mine was a 6, so I was literally like pretty much crawling on the floor. And I've seen videos of me like on TV, and I'm like, everyone's like, oh, what you were saying, that was so great. I remember I was on a podcast, and people were like, you're really doing your thing, and all I could just see is that I was just sweating, hot, about to like faint. And the reason I'm giving this as an example, and of course this is not in line with chemo at all, because I can understand that chemo is
I would say maybe those hot
flashes.
flashes. I think being on a rush hour tube in a wig when you have a hot flash is like a certain type of hell.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway,
and no, but that's a really powerful point. I think that's the thing, that you were going through the chemo and these menopausal symptoms and the emotions and the stress of all that's happening to you and adjusting to the change. It's a lot. So these tasks like the pleasure journals, I think oftentimes, and I would also give clients these kind of tasks as well, but what I think clients think is that, oh, we're given this task so we can just kind of, remind ourselves that we need to sort of enjoy pleasure, and it'd be great to explore like what things I like, and it feels like a nice, fun, fairy task. But from a therapeutic point of view, what we're also looking at is what it brings out in you, the good and the bad, right? Because oftentimes there's information in the exercise, and it sounds like that's what you're getting. You're from this exercise, you're getting information that something needs a bit of focus, something needs a bit of attention, that the healing journey is still continuing, right? And you've come so far, which is fabulous, but it shows you that it's still, a little bit more to kind of go through so that you can be where you want to be.
Yeah, it's really on point, the idea of sort of feeling let down by your body, and like to the point that you're so disillusioned that you receiving pleasure for it feels like it doesn't deserve it. Like that's pretty deep.
Yeah, it is. And also sometimes we're unsure of what our body can do, and will do, because, oftentimes up until a certain age, our body has done exactly what it needs to do, but also we're used to it working a particular way. So, for example, we know that if we eat a particular food item, then it might sort of, make us have diarrhea or constipation or whatever. But we also know that, if we drink a certain amount, this will happen. Like we know what our body's going to do. But when illness comes knocking at our door, you're left in a position where you're not quite sure what your body is going to do next. You're not sure if it's going to fight something. You're not sure if certain organs are going to collapse. You're just not sure what's going to happen. So I think that takes some time to process, the trauma of that, and to get to a place of accepting that I need to just surrender because I don't know what my body is going to do next.
Yeah.
And so not that it doesn't deserve pleasure, because it absolutely does deserve pleasure, but it might be that that's also a journey in terms of kind of introducing pleasure into your world.
Maybe small little bits at a time.
Yeah. And also as well, I mean, the body and the mind is so complex. Like it could be that, certain pleasurable things trigger things on a different subconscious level as well. So I know this might sound silly saying out loud, but our bodies and minds are so complex that, for example, you could, I don't know, be massaging your hands with like lavender massage oil, and consciously you may not be aware that there's an association with maybe the lavender from the massage oil and the lavender that you smell on the lady walking past as you were having chemo. Like, it's so subtle, it's so deep, and we're never going to know the answers to everything. But I think we just have to trust that our body is responding to something.
Yeah.
And that gives us the information that we need to do something.
Because when I was speaking to Giap, she said that she found sort of subtle mindfulness exercises with sensation to be very disassociating.
Right.
And so she was very open about having gone through sexual assault. That's when she started using kind of kinky tools and conscious kink to reconnect with her body. And she was like, I needed stronger sensations to kind of reconnect to feeling. And I kind of relate to that in a way. Like, it made me think a bit about presence and awareness and where our awareness goes, because obviously through trauma, our awareness kind of leaves us and we go into the survival mode. We have to feel safe to be aware.
Yeah.
I kind of bring this up because yesterday I was doing quite a lot of reading around mindfulness and sex. There's a pioneer around like mindfulness and sex, Dr. Laurie Brotto, who I'm sure you are very familiar with.
Yeah.
And she's great. And then she started pioneering some research around like women who have survived cancer, whether mindfulness practice can help them with their sexual difficulties. And the research is too early at the moment to get any like proper results from what I can gather.
Yeah.
But I think from my own personal experience, it's almost like, I think if I'd started this kind of journey with mindfulness, I don't think I would have been able to be present, because mindfulness is all about being present and like non-judgmental awareness. I think it just wouldn't have touched the side.
No.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's interesting with mindfulness because on paper it sounds quite easy, just focus your attention somewhere and just stay in the moment. But not if that's triggering. It's not if that brings up too many painful feelings in any particular moment. So it is really important, I think, and I think it just goes back to, you just have to listen to your body, like in terms of what it needs. And I think for so many of us, we don't listen to our bodies. That's the problem. We, like I said, the couples that I work with that say, "Oh, a relationship's fine, it's no big deal." But I'm like, but you're not connecting to your partner, you're struggling to orgasm, you're struggling to even feel any real sexual desire. There's something going on here. Something, and then when we sort of unpack it and explore it a little bit further, we hear that, that quite a few times my partner's been quite disrespectful to me, or I'm the only one looking after the kids and, my partner isn't helping. And, it's like, well, how does that make you feel? It makes you feel quite disrespected. Okay, so
maybe why you don't want to desire your partner.
Right. And a disrespected person, do you want to be, physically and emotionally connected to them in such a vulnerable way? Probably not. So, we're not listening to what's going on, I suppose, not just internally, but also what's going on around us, and connecting the two.
Yeah. Lots there.
Yeah.
Lots there. Have you worked with cancer? I'm just like curious about the relationship between mindfulness and sexual difficulties after cancer. So I was wondering, like, now maybe is a good time, because I feel like I've created that level of safety that maybe has allowed me to then maybe find like mindfulness practice more helpful, but maybe not, because I guess the pleasure journal, that was essentially a mindfulness practice.
Yeah, but I suppose it doesn't mean you have to completely, end that task of, seeking pleasure. It's about just kind of being curious about what are my feelings then, maybe about my body. So maybe like in an individual therapy, how do I feel about my body? How do I feel about what my body might do in the future? How do I adapt to the changes that my body might make, so that I can still enjoy things? Maybe pleasure isn't touch for you at the moment. Yeah, maybe it is spending quality time with people. Maybe it is, having a nice cup of tea. Like, I think, if you operate from a place of curiosity, and I know that's a classic word that we often use, curiosity, but I think if we operate from that place where we're really exploring and finding out, but also being okay with the fact that a door might close on, if you're trying something new and your body's saying, "Oh no, not now." It's not saying not ever. It might just be saying like not yet or not right now.
Yeah.
And so then it's about, okay, let's explore a little bit more, see what else, until you get the answers of, yes, this is a door that you go down to enjoy pleasure. So, when when you're sort of your question is kind of around like, should I start mindfulness tasks now, Charlie? Pretty much. It then goes back to what we do in society, which is we get permission from others, about what our body might need. But, ultimately we are the experts of our body. We know how things feel on a very basic level. If you pinch your skin, if that's painful, if that's pleasurable. Another person can never tell us whether it's painful or pleasurable. And I think we have to kind of adopt that way of thinking when it comes to the world of
let the body
intimacy.
lead.
Yeah, absolutely. And be okay when it closes the door and says, not right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is right. And I think what's been good is at the beginning of this process, I don't think I was curious or open or playful, but that has now re-entered the picture.
Good.
I think before I was frightened and frustrated and stuck.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to feel those kind of sexual values to come back in. And I think also just feeling, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I love reading around this topic and learning more about sexuality and sexual practices. And I think that feels really nice, because sometimes I think people are like, okay, well, I don't know, what do I expose my body to? Because my imagination has sort of shut down a bit. And so I think part of that curiosity, for me at least, is get back to exploring and reading up on things and being like, oh, that's kind of cool, I'd like to do that. So I think I'm happy that that's sort of re-entered into the space.
I mean, I know it's probably controversial for me to mention AI at this point, but
no,
I do.
Why not?
Right, and I say that because I think there's AI gets such a bad rap, doesn't it? But I do think obviously you need to be careful with AI. That goes without saying. If you've got a situation that's happening for you and it's medical related, then obviously go to see the GP. Like that obviously goes without saying. But I think that there's some really great examples of different ways that you can enjoy the world of sex that you may not have thought about. And when you go onto AI, it then kind of leads you to different websites as well. So I think it could be fun just to sort of explore and see what's out there. If you're interested in sex toys, what do your sex toys do? Or so many sites like audio erotica that's quite fun, right? And and through that you might be able to then find things that you didn't realize were a turn on but actually were. And so I think if we see it from a play, and again, I always try and move away from the words like playful and curious and explore and journeys, process, and all this.
I know, because there are so many buzzwords within this field.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah,
but I suppose they do accurately describe what
we're trying to say. Yeah,
but I think at the same time, because they're used so often, sometimes it can go over people's heads in terms of But I think the world of sex needs to add that element of playfulness. That needs to be there, right? And I think for so many of us, sex is just this serious thing that we do, and we get angry if our bodies don't do what it needs to do. But if you're not turned on by a partner, then that's information. That's like, okay, what is going on here? What's going on with me? What's going on maybe with my relationship with them? There's things that we can find out from that. It's given us something to work with.
Exactly. And then on your point about exploring, I think another thing I would encourage people to do if they're listening is go to talks about sexuality.
Right.
I went to one about fantasy a couple of weeks ago, and it was just so great, just listening to two women, both professionals and experts, just talk about fantasy in this really fun kind of silly, frivolous way. And you're like, we should be thinking more about our fantasies and exploring our erotic imagination. And there's ways in if that feels difficult. There's books you can read, and they suggested quite a lot. Even Gillian Anderson's one can be just quite inspiring. And gets your juices flowing a little bit. And I think that's a good thing.
I absolutely agree. I feel like there's so much out there now than there was ever before. I mean, the good and the bad. So you need to sort of look for the good.
Very true.
Right? But I feel like when I was younger, there was none of this. I mean, all I had was More magazine that, where it would be I don't know, position of the week. And I didn't really know what they were talking about. So, now there is so much more. So we can play around and have so much fun. And our bodies are magical and they are amazing and they do wonderful things, but those wonderful things may not be in alignment with what we believe wonderful to be at times, but they do. It's amazing how they work. And one thing I know about pleasure is that if you can't experience pleasure in one way, there will always be a way. Always be a way that you can experience pleasure.
Well, maybe we should end on that hopeful note.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh,
And
my
I
pleasure.
really appreciate all your advice. And
Oh,
just
thank you.
tying up this series. I really, really appreciate it.
Lovely. And I wish you all the very best. This has been amazing.
Yeah,
Great
thanks
series.
so much. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Come Undone. A massive appreciation, especially to all those who've been there from the first episode all the way to the final. I really hope that it's offered some clarity and some hope for anyone who's gone through cancer or grief or any huge life change and who've been struggling with their sexuality. My intention was to offer something nuanced, something layered, something deep that really looked at how these big life experiences can affect our sexuality. So I really hope that it's helped you, even in a small way. And I also really hope that it's showed off the world of sex coaching and the world of sex therapy. I think lots of people think when I say I'm a sex coach that I have a whistle at the end of someone's bed and I'm telling people what sex positions that they're doing. I hope that this whole journey has shown that that's very much not the case. It's a very broad and wide and deep discipline. And I really hope it inspires people to go and get support if that's indeed what they are wanting to do. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. If you're feeling inspired to explore your sexuality, whether after a big life event or simply because you feel disconnected, head over to my website. You'll find the details in the description, along with a workbook I've created to go hand in hand with this podcast. It's designed as a stepping stone to help you reconnect to your body and your sexual spark.